drift factors. See, there's a difference between the pattern explanations and the process explanations.
Well, just to say it.
And that's very different from the big idea of common ancestry, which sort of undergirds the whole works. And that's so detailed explanations or detailed arguments are very different from the big explanation. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, you just very neatly defined the gap in the lexicon between somebody who's educated in the sciences as opposed to somebody who's a casual reader who has to go before a school board. It's difficult to bring that language into something coherent that doesn't just fall off the tongue and get clouded because there's no underlying understanding of those processes. There's only the...
Well, what happens so often is that, you know, someone will go to the school board meeting and say, scientist A says this and scientist B says that about evolution. Therefore, evolution is not a science because people are arguing. I mean, right there you've got a real misunderstanding about how science works.
They see the isms.
Well, yeah, then you got the whole isms things as well. Ron?
What do you think of the tactic of people like Dawkins and Hitchens that try to attack religion at its base?
Well, they have a different goal than I do. I mean, they're attacking religion. I'm not attacking religion. I'm trying to get evolution taught. Yeah.
We had another court decision today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure did.
I wonder if you think it's possible that corporate money will actually push for modernization of education and say, look, we want people to learn something that will make us more effective competitors in today's world. Is that a possible outcome of all this? I'm just trying to look on the bright side.
Well, Dr. Hayes, I think I couldn't possibly have been in this job for as long as I have if I wasn't a chronic optimist. I'm not sure about corporations, though. I think there are people in corporations who are certainly very concerned about the quality of science education and the need for public understanding of science. Corporations themselves tend to be lumbering entities that I'm not sure they are acting in our best interest. I think we have to get the people who run the corporations to do things. I'm not sure we can get the corporations themselves to do things. And that isn't just wordplay. Because corporations do have different responsibilities, and I'm not sure that they can actually do the kinds of things that need to be done. They're also not very good at corporate philanthropy. Seems to be almost an oxymoron. And
have you seen any examples of corporate involvement in this issue? No.
No. Anything that smacks of controversy, the corporations seem to run screaming in the other direction. And certainly evolution seems to scare people half to death. And of course it scares people half to death because it is confused with being anti-religious. I mean, which seems to be completely unnecessary to me, but yes, ma'am, in the back.
This has something to do with the anti-religious thing that you just said. So the basic drive behind your book and behind just this whole thing about keeping religions out of the classroom in that sense, it isn't to keep religion out of the classroom in a theological sense, right?
It's keeping it out of the science classroom.
Classes, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, the United States has a First Amendment that calls for public institutions to be religiously neutral. The Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause taken together mean that public institutions have to be religiously neutral, which means classrooms have to be religiously neutral. If you are promoting creationism, you are not being religiously neutral. If you are attacking religion, you are not being religiously neutral. And there's some kind of interesting history here where the creationists have tried to argue that teaching evolution is attacking religion. They haven't gotten anywhere, which is good. But certainly teaching creationism is promoting religion, so you can't do that. On the other hand, comparative religion is a perfectly reasonable and I would say a very desirable academic subject. And where to teach it, of course, is a very interesting subject because you do have to consider two very important things. The level of understanding of the student and the maturity of the student, because students, you know, I wouldn't do it at junior high. The students are much too dogmatic. Maybe at upper level high school, but the teacher preparation is extremely important, and teachers have to not only know the subject material, they also have to understand very clearly that they are not to advocate any particular, they're not to advocate for or against any particular religious position.
But like the basic controversy and conflict that basically fueled the fire for all of this is that just that it kind of crossed over into people were trying to make it seem like it was scientifically proven, or like it was in the realm of science as opposed to in the, because you mentioned that religion, if you've ever taken an anthropology course, like Anthropology 1, they'll always tell you religion is one of the basic things of that, you know, humans do.
Yeah.
Like all throughout, basically, since we've been able to be classified as the humans that we are now, you know, so it's like, it's not a
like kinship.
Valid thing to teach or a valid thing to believe. It's just not, where people get it confused is that it's science. Or
what happened
specifically.
What happened in the history of the creation and evolution issue in the United States, very briefly, is when evolution started coming into the textbooks in the 1920s, this caused a reaction of conservative Christians who did not want their children taught evolution because they associated it with not just with contradicting a literal truth of the Bible, which was part of it. They also associated evolution with social Darwinism. They associated evolution with things like the rapacious, laissez-faire capitalists, you know, the bad guys. You know, frankly, William Jennings Bryan would have fit just fine in Berkeley. You know, he was a progressive. He gets kind of a bad rap, but he was for women's suffrage. He was for a good shake for labor. He was, you know, he was a good guy in a lot of ways. And he basically associated evolution with a lot of these really bad things that were being done to people by people like Andrew Carnegie. And you know, so you could sort of see he had a good reason to dislike evolution in addition to the religious stuff. And so getting evolution out of the textbooks was a really good idea. They succeeded. That's what the Scopes trial was all about. That's why the laws banning evolution education, banning the teaching of evolution was all about, and they succeeded. Evolution didn't come back into the textbooks until the 1960s, quite frankly, when I was in high school. I didn't get taught evolution. I was sort of the early part of that. When evolution came back into the high schools, that's when the anti-evolution movement ramped up again. And that's when Henry Morris and the Institute for Creation Research kicked up again, and creation science got invented. Creation science got invented as a way of getting evolution into the textbooks as an alternate science to evolution science, so that they could be taught alongside each other. I think that's kind of what you were talking about. That evolution science was being taught, well, let's teach creation science and balance it out. And then, of course, we had to have a Supreme Court decision, trials and so forth, to decide that, well, you know, creation science really wasn't valid science. It was really just religion in disguise, so that falls under the First Amendment, so that's got to go. Creation science doesn't work. And then it had a reinvention as intelligent design, and here we go again. The whole history of this is, here's evolution, we have to have something to balance it out. And that something is always religion, and it's always something that bumps right into the First Amendment again. Yes, sir?
Do other developed countries have this foaming at the mouth over curriculum, or is it just us?
Turkey.
We beat Turkey. The good news is that most other countries don't have the history that the United States does, and it's not nearly as bad. Teaching of evolution is much more matter of fact in Great Britain, France, Germany, and other parts of the country, of Europe, say Japan, China. The bad news is anti-evolutionism is growing. I just attended 2 international conferences over this last year, this last fall. One in England, one in Alexandria, Egypt, interestingly enough. And both were attended by people from all over the world. In Islamic countries, the situation is predictably pretty grim. The scientists there feel quite beleaguered because they have a great... Islamic scientists understand evolution, want to teach it, but they are facing a great deal of opposition from the clerics and from the general public, who have been led to believe that evolution is something that's un-Quranic, and so therefore it's just off the table. But even in places like Germany, there's a growing young Earth creationist movement. They basically have taken Henry Morris' young Earth creationism and translated this into German, and these books are spreading. Some of you have heard about Harun Yahya, who is a Turkish creationist, who's basically taken Henry Morris' young Earth creationism, dropped off the young Earth part, stuck with the anti-evolution part, and sort of put a little frosting of intelligent design out and just repackaged it and translated it into Farsi and Arabic, and is moving this stuff all through the Arab-speaking and Turkish-speaking world. There's a small creationist movement in Great Britain. Mostly, there's a small young Earth creationist movement in the Christian churches in Great Britain, but again, predominantly the anti-evolution movement in Great Britain is from the Muslims. But it's tending to have a somewhat intimidating effect upon the teachers. So it's something that we're going to have to watch. Somebody had, yes, sir.
2 questions, one real short and one maybe longer. The first one is, I got wind of you, by the way, when I picked up this wonderful book, the Encyclopedia for Evolution by Milner, and came across your name with one little thing about the academic papers. At the time, I guess you guys had looked at 100,000 different, I don't know how many, but and there were this many scientific papers that have been accepted into prestigious journals that dealt with evolution, and basically 0 that dealt with creationism. I'm wondering if that's still an ongoing project, and have the creationists been able to inject anything into an academic journal at this point? Is there anything that's out there?
The comment has to do with a survey that a colleague of mine and I did many years ago back in Kentucky in the 80s. And then it's been, the same methodology has been repeated subsequently in the 90s, and then I think somebody also repeated it in the 2000s. And of course it's a lot easier and cheaper nowadays because you can use the internet, where you take keywords and you take the names of prominent creationists, and you just do a literature search. Are these people publishing in the scientific journals? Are they publishing peer-reviewed research? And of course, it's not an impossible task, but there's a certain amount of shoveling you have to do because the names are the same, and you sometimes have to go and you actually have to read, wade through these journals, because the title might suggest that this is actually an article about, say, intelligent design, but it's actually maybe an article critical of intelligent design, or just a commentary about intelligent design. The issue is, I try to actually, well, back up, Genie. Back in the 80s when Henry Cole and I did that first article, that was at a time when we were providing lawyers with some ammunition. We wanted to demonstrate the fact that although the claim was made that creation science was a valid science, we wanted to document the obvious, that there was actually no real science of creation science. And we took a number of topics that were present in creation science, and we actually wrote to journal editors and asked them if any articles had been published using those topics. So this was a slightly different methodology. It was a very good methodology. We actually got 100% response from the journal. There's never been survey research that had 100% response from the respondents. This was fabulous research. I've actually tried to encourage my colleagues to use a slightly different focus, because frankly, sooner or later, there are enough journals out there that, you know, one of the intelligent design people is going to get something published in the peer-reviewed literature, and they're going to wave it around, see, we've got science here. You know, what matters much more than whether Joe Blow, the intelligent design proponent, gets something published in the left branch journal of whatever. What matters is anybody using the concept of irreducible complexity or complex specified information or any of these other kind of hand-waving phrases. Is anybody using these concepts to explain biology? Is anybody using these concepts in a useful way to help us understand biology? That is the important question. That is much more important than, does so-and-so have articles in peer-reviewed journals? And if you ask, and that's the important question, and if you ask that question, you will the burden of proof is upon them, number one, which is a much better position to be in than having us to have to do all that work. And if you ask them to demonstrate how is anybody using irreducible complexity to help understand nature, they will not be able to provide anything, because, you know, irreducible complexity is sort of the heart of the intelligent design argument. Because it's the idea that basically evolution cannot explain really, really, really complicated stuff like a bacteria flagellum or something else that all parts of which have to be present or it will not function. You know, the underlying premise of the irreducible complexity concept is that evolution can't do the job. So, how does that help us understand nature? You know, you're saying, evolution can't do it. So where do we go from there? It's a worthless concept. So the burden of proof is upon them to show us how that helps us understand nature. And, you know, I mean, Behe published this paper with Snope in Protein Science. And the very next issue of Protein Science, what's his name? Anybody remember the name of the guy who took it apart in the very next issue? You know, my brain is not working today.
Myers?
No.
No.
Second day of the migraine. I can blame it on Imatrix. But the very next issue of Protein Science, a very competent biologist said, here's what's wrong with that paper. And you read this second article and you wonder why the editor of Protein Science ever published the Behe and Snope paper. But that is a peer-reviewed paper. It doesn't mention the word irreducible complexity. It doesn't mention intelligent design, but it is held up as an article published by Behe about the concept of intelligent design that they claim is a peer-reviewed. You know, it is a peer-reviewed journal, but it's junk. You know, it's worthless. It basically says, oh, natural selection can't explain this kind of a double binding site. And like saying, the next issue it says, oh yeah, I can. you set up the example wrong, and besides, it does. You lose. Anyway, you had a question.
Yeah. You know, there's a saying, by mixing with those who agree with us, they reinforce our ideas, and by mixing with people who disagree with us, they challenge our ideas. So I'm here to challenge you, actually. And here's my bone of contention.
You must listen to Marty Nimco on Sunday.
Okay. You know, I went to Cal and I took basic courses in biology, physical anthropology as well. No expert, and my major was psychology. Now in psychology, at least at Cal, if you're basing your science on pretty much on retrospective studies, that's not comprehensive science. Okay? And you know, like they say in law, basic law is habeas corpus. Show me a body. I don't want to see the bones, it's very impressive. I want to see the flesh. So here's my doubt, my great doubt. I've thought about it for years since this whole conversation came into the school. Actually, it was on a KQED radio show. I think maybe you were there discussing the whole creation idea in schools. So here's my bone of contention. How many species there are? How many million at least anyway. How many official species are there?
Of what?
1.8.
Species of what? What?
Of animal? Or
Close to everything.
Okay, so we'll say 1 million. Okay, just to be conservative. Okay. Now we've been observing those species in the Darwinian paradigm for at least 100 years. You know, at least mainstream. So that's 1 million species times 100 years. That's 100 million years of species time. Then, of course, you have to consider the population you're observing. Like, why there's so many flies observed in evolution studies? Because they, reproduce like flies. They can mutate very quickly. You can see their little deviations within their species. But so then you like human. Now we're like 6.5 billion. So the point is, you multiply the populations and you can figure out how many species. So billions of humans times 100 million species years. We're talking about trillions of species years we've been observing over this time span. So here's my point. We have not seen what to speak of a monkey going to humanid or a human turn into some ET creature. We haven't even seen a mosquito turn into a fly. So habeas corpus, show me one species that's actually evolved in your 100 years, in your billion, trillions of years of species time. You can't show me one species that's actually evolved.
Have you read
so
the new
I'm sorry,
Dawkins book?
It's a bankrupt philosophy.
Have you read the new Richard Dawkins book?
Well, that's another thing. There's great book. Have you read the new book by Robert Jensen? There's 4 types of fundamentalism. First type is religious,
Have you had a
and
flu
the other
shot?
side of religious is atheistic. And he cites Richard Dawkins as one of those atheistic fundamentalists. So, I'm sorry, I don't consider him. But that's my critical point is, habeas corpus, show me one species that's evolved. You can't do it. Please show me a fly that's turned into,
No, wait a minute.
a spider.
Your argument is
Sir?
fallacious.
You know the expression straw man. What you want an evolutionary biologist to come up with is something that we don't claim happens. We don't claim a fruit fly will turn into a mosquito. We don't claim that a monkey will turn into a human.
Show me any of that.
Well, what we
What have you? And I misunderstood.
I think exactly.
I don't think I learned my lessons right in culture.
I think that's exactly the case, sir. I think that's exactly the case. I think the problem is that somehow your understanding of what evolutionary biologists are claiming is off the peg, because we never claimed that a fruit fly is going to change into a mosquito, or that a frog is going to change into a giraffe, or anything like that. I agree with you completely. None of those things you describe has ever happened, and we don't expect them to. But we can show you speciation. We can show you where
retrospectively. We can show me. Let's see some of the species come that hasn't been there.
If you understand,
tens of thousands of species disappear.
If you understand species in the same way that we understand species, which is a reproductively isolated population, then we can show you a new species that is reproductively isolated from a previous one. Speciation has occurred within the lifespans of that 100 years that you're talking about, and evolutionary biologists have documented this.
But we haven't seen these major transformations that
but that's not the same thing.
With your narrative of evolution.
But that's not what we're expecting. We're not expecting to find major body plan changes, because that's not what evolutionary biologists predict. Partly because those sort of big body plan changes that you're talking about are the kinds of things that happen very early in evolutionary development. And pretty much what
Retrospect again, okay.
No.
You're supposed to believe it.
When we look at evolution, what we see is a series of radiations and then variations on the theme. Radiations, variations on the theme. We don't see the major kinds of changes that you expect. Don't say that we failed because we're not finding something that you expect us to find when we don't expect to find it.
Well, excuse me, the whole principle of monkeys turning into hominids, even term hominids.
Nobody expects monkeys to turn into hominids.
Oh, I don't know what all these, you go to the museums, you see the,
Okay, first of all...
What does evolution mean then? I mean,
first of all, no monkey ever turned into a hominid. Monkeys and hominids, okay. For a monkey to turn into a hominid, that's sort of like saying your cousin turned into you. Now, how can you say that, okay. You are in the same relation, we are in the same relation to monkeys as you are to your cousin. Now, you and your cousin are still alive, right? Just like monkeys and we are still alive, but you're not descended from your cousin any more than we're descended from monkeys. We and monkeys shared a common ancestor just like you and your cousin shared a common ancestor. But you're not descended from your cousin. We're not descended from monkeys. The whole thing about evolution is common ancestry.
Okay, again, you haven't understood my question. Okay, go back to those whatever basic species.
That's not 100 years ago, my
basic
friend.
Species turn into new species that's going to, again, show us something beyond your bones.
But you're expecting us to show this really big change in 100 years. It's not going to happen.
I told you, we were talking about billions of years of species time. You failed to answer my doubt.
We must move on. Other people have a question. The lady in the back?
Well, just bouncing off of his question, my question is, when you're looking at people who want to see things in a short period of time, is it fair to, rather than looking at evolution by means of natural selection, look at evolution by means of unnatural selection, selective breeding, domestic animals? Is that a fair jump to make?
Well, it's
look at that.
It's parallel. I mean, it's
So because that's something you see, I mean, we've registered new breeds of dogs in the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm. It's, I mean, Darwin used it as an analogy. It's it's a comparable change. I don't. It's cheating in a way.
Yeah, that's kind of my question, because it's not.
I don't like to use it as a teaching tool because. Especially something like dogs or other domesticated animals are just so, incredibly inbred. Really, you don't. The crazy thing is, people look at dogs and they think, oh, they're so incredibly varied, and yet they only look so varied because we've selected out all these variations. All those variations were present in the species Canis familiaris. But we've just sort of made them obvious. It just shows the terrific amount of variation that does exist or can be found over time in wild populations, and so that's useful. But when you're just introducing people to genetics, I don't like to use. When I was teaching, I kind of tended to try to avoid domesticated animals just because I think people do get kind of confused. But yeah, the process is the same, so certainly. Let's see, who hasn't had a question yet? This man.
Yeah, I was raised in a liberal Jewish family and very secular atheist, actually not hard agnostic. And today I'm a young earth creationist. And the biggest problem I had is I went through public education before I became a young earth creationist. I never was presented with any of the maybe problems or within the evolution theory. And I'm just wondering why, without even teaching creationism, why some of the issues that others have or the opposition to certain theories, why more of that's not presented with the theory and it's presented so solid. And it seems a little misleading to me after the fact.
The schools, the K-12 classroom, is the place where the consensus view of science, or the consensus view of history, the consensus view of literature, science, math should be taught. What you're talking about are ideas that are very, very far outside the consensus. An idea that you find in young earth creationism is the idea that the earth is young. Classic example.
I'm not even talking about teaching young earth creationism. But even in history, like we start to hear about, you know, like